Good evening and welcome to today's session on BIC Streams in collaboration with Vikalp, a Syrian love story. Joining us today is the director, Sean McAllister, in conversation with Sunanda Bhat. Before I hand over to Sunanda, a few quick instructions. For those of you who are here for the first time and would like to sign up to our mailing lists, you can do that by visiting our website, or you can follow us on our social media channels, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. With that, welcome everyone, and over to you, Sunanda.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you for being here. This is Vikalp Bengaluru's first online screening, and we are delighted to have your film, very powerful film, have you a Syrian love story, and we're also very happy to have you here to, tell us the backstory of the film and about your filmmaking. So about a Syrian love story, Raghda and Amer, in your own words, you said that they seem to have stepped into the film and used it for their own means, And can you just give us the backstory? Tell us how you, actually got these very interesting people to kind of feature in your film, and how long did it take you to find suitable characters for your film?
Well, I was in Damascus 2008, 2009, and I was there because of a friend that had invited me there, basically, someone I'd met from a film festival. I didn't know anything about Damascus or Syria, and it was not headline news then. In fact, it was the opposite. Nobody was interested in Syria. And so I had two problems: the problem of finding a character, but also the problem of getting a film commissioned. So I was basically just enjoying being in Damascus for on and off for probably about eight months, really. And in that time, usually my time spent living in a place is an attempt to understand the country and the political situation, and I suppose formulate the kind of film I want to make. And in that time, I suppose I tried a few different types of films. I try different characters, they fall through. But there seemed to be the undercurrent of this feeling that this was a country that was putting on a front for tourism at the time, was putting on a front, a veneer of kind of a glossy, attractive, nice place to come. But if you scratch the surface, the prisons were full of political prisoners, and there was kind of a horrific kind of tyranny in the place. So that's what I started to feel. And then through a friend of a friend, I met Amer one night in a bar, who told me about Raghda, his wife. And it was almost too difficult to imagine making the film. I never really, but he just said, come and film me. So when I say he was interested for his own political purpose, his wife was in prison. No one was looking at Syria. No one gave a damn about Syria. No one would give a damn about Raghda if she died or not. And many, many, many died in prisons, and no one gave a damn because no one was looking at Syria. So he just was grasping at anything and saw an opportunity, I suppose, to highlight the plight. But I also think that, the films I've made have been human stories, but people caught in political conflicts, so that their relationship to the film isn't just that it's a humanist film, that there is a political motive. So usually the people I film have got a political background and have a reason for wanting their story told, to tell the world about what's really going on in Syria. You mute.
So how long did it take you to actually become comfortable, for them to become comfortable with you, to, bond and to get the kind of scenes that you've managed to get in this film?
When I started filming Amer, all my friends in Syria left me. And so I had no other friends other than Amer. because my association with Amer, who was a highly watched person because his wife was in prison for political reasons, so it suddenly made the risk was too risky for ordinary people to be connected with me. So I quite quickly got involved with him because the only way to keep safe was to stay with him as much as possible. So I spent a lot of time in the family's house and going between Homs and Tartus, and we quite quickly bonded because things started to happen, I suppose. He started getting calls from the secret police and ended up having to go quite quickly undercover. And then of course the protests and the revolution in the country began, and then he became quite instrumental in organizing the first few protests in Damascus, hoping in a crazy way that there might be an amnesty and his wife might be released. And of course, bizarrely, that's what happened.
But it was because of the fact that you had got arrested and it was in the news, was it, that she got released?
No, that was before. So she was released. She was released because there was a wave of protests, and initially Bashar al-Assad was saying, let's try to appease these protests. Let's try to find a way of sort of, okay, we'll release some of the political prisoners, just calm down, hoping it would calm down, as well as shooting live bullets into them, you know. And of course it didn't calm down. And a few months after she was released, I was arrested. And then I was only arrested because I wasn't commissioned. And the reason I was arrested was because I made that dangerous move from being embedded with Amer, which I would have been if I'd have just been commissioned and was making my film. I always attach myself as closely as possible to the subject. They are the safest way to remain safe. I was taking a commission for news work for a news channel over here, and ended up having to expose myself on protests. And I was on a protest trying to get some footage for the stupid news to pay the little money, and then I got arrested. And then as I got arrested, they quickly knew what to do and moved the family to Lebanon.
So I've seen that most of your films you have male characters, but here you have one of the characters is a headstrong woman, and I was wondering if you had to change the way you interacted with her, the rapport, the bond that you had to build. Did you use, did it work differently with her?
I don't think so. I think I think if you get on with people, that kind of thing doesn't matter. I don't think she was driven. She's quite a political, feisty person, and we quite quickly hit it off. She was always amused that she'd gone to prison and left her family and came out of prison and walked into a film, which was just quite a surprise for her. And then this whole kind of thing happened. And in a way, we became more close as the journey moved on, because they went into a period of their marriage went into a crisis in Lebanon, and her anxiety over the fight between the revolution and the family, and she went back to fight in Syria, leaving Amer and the kids, and then eventually they get to France, and then in France I have a more kind of intimate role with them both, trying to somehow keep them sane and keep things, because when they were over in France they'd lost all common connection with anything cultural, and they were trying to make sense of their lives outside of everything that was normal. You might have all the comforts of and it was nice accommodation, but key things were missing for them. And so I would get frantic calls from Amer one week to come to France to be there to try to mediate. And then the next week, Raghda would be calling me to come back and take her point of view and take her side and try to understand her point of view and try to mediate between them. And this thing was kind of unfolding. And I was just involved in filming. But again, the film wasn't commissioned. It was only commissioned towards the end of this whole journey, really. It was commissioned, and it was 5 years in the making. It was commissioned in its 4th year.
Oh. So you put in your own money?
Well, it was just a commitment to and I think a lot of the intimate material is because I was genuinely part of the family for so long. I was helping them in Lebanon to get to France, and when they were in France, I was helping them in France. And I think they'd even forgotten that I was making a film because they'd given up on this notion of me ever getting commissioned. Because there was this dream I had 4 years ago of making a film, and the BBC have never been interested. They've never, so many rejections. They just gave up, and then eventually, I think the story became the problem is there's a topicality in television, and Syria was big news at one point, and then it becomes, funnily enough, when I was there in 2008, Syria wasn't popular. No one knew who Assad was, and no one knew what Syria was. By the time 3 or 4 years later, I go for a commission again, and Syria is everywhere, and they're not interested because Syria is too popular and too much everywhere, So there's this kind of topicality with television, which is quite a difficult thing to. But I think what the film managed, because of the longevity of the project, the uniqueness of the story that's never really seen, isn't necessarily the story of Syria. It's the story of the crisis after Syria, which is the plight of people and refugees.
And, I wanted you to talk a little bit about your relationship with the kids, Bob and Kaka. It adds a lot of depth to the film. And, how did you go about that? And along with that, even the fact that you are you play such a big role in your films, you are one of the characters in there. And so how do you maintain a distance yet be close enough, to make certain choices? How do you not get too emotional? What is your working style, or do you just let it go and,
well, I think I always think casting is king. So I spend a long time, years often, looking for the character, because I think if you don't find the right character, you can't. Those things don't happen naturally. So the answer to those things is that I think you have to have a natural connection with the people. So I got on genuinely as a friend with Raghda. There was no thing that she's a woman and I'm a man, and then we just got on as really, and we still do, as very, very comfortably with both Raghda and Amer. The kids were at different points I remember Bob looking after Bob in the bus station in Homs, buying him falafel, and his father running after him when he's running away, and then in Beirut, taking him on day trips and taking them to the beach, and Kaka. And in a sense, I think they consider me like an uncle now. You have a functional role. There's so much stress going on. I mean, they lived in 16 different houses in the making of that film. In the West, they say that the most stressful thing that we can do is move house once.
Yes.
So, it puts it into perspective. So I was aware of the strains at different points, and all I could do was maybe take the kids out on trips, little trips to little special things where they won't go to a cafe and at no point did they really have enough money to have any special luxuries, But I think also just that I think you have to fit. You have to be part of the furniture or part of the family, and I think it's difficult to fake that, and that's why it's difficult to make films with the wrong characters. The character, for me, it's very personal as well. You have to find the right people that you feel connected to, as well as that there's some sort of story happening that they contain. They're telling a bigger picture of the world that we live in today. I mean, I think the suicide thing was a critical time when, I mean, I was kind of pleased I wasn't there when that happened, but I was there the week after. And, you know, it's difficult to, there's terrible ups and downs. And in those moments of despair, it's quite difficult to be level-headed as well.
Yeah.
But I don't think people see those crises very often. They see news items so regularly about these invisible statistics called refugees. But they never really see human beings with emotions and kids and ups and downs and humor, laughing as well as crying, you know, all of those things. And I think that's what the power of a good documentary is. I think that it accompanies, it can add to it can help the news, because I think that people then watch the news and they remember the depth and connection they maybe had with the documentary. The next time they see a 30-second news report, or a 3-minute, if you're lucky, news report of something. What a documentary can do is take us much more emotionally into the living rooms of people's lives.
Sure. So Sean, I was just wondering, you know, as the film goes along, you kind of, the personal lives come to the forefront, and the politics of Syria is kind of, you know, kept, you know, very much in the background. So was that a conscious choice? Why didn't you run that parallelly? Didn't Raghda need that as a foil to her character, which was, you know, going through so much of turmoil?
Yeah, I think a lot of people saw that, and some people want more of that. It was a conscious decision to have less of it, I must say. I know Raghda wanted more of her, you know, her views on the political setup and her philosophies on this and that. And for me, it was much more important to get that film on primetime telly as much as possible, to as massive audience as possible. And that film that wasn't commissioned for 4 years eventually got commissioned after 4 years by BBC4, which has a minority audience. When we delivered the film to the BBC, they saw the film, and it went on at a primetime slot on BBC One, which is the first time that kind of thing's happened for a Storyville documentary. Had we gone more with the political context, I just don't think it would have had the same reach and connection to an audience. So I think you have to decide what you want to do, really. And I've always gone character, and to take as big an audience as possible to these far-flung places, and to not bombard them with the usual that you get from the news, which is the political this and that, political fighting and context. Character and kids, and the stuff that you don't normally see. I'd leave all of the other political stuff to the hundreds and hundreds of other Syrian films. You can get all of that everywhere else, but you can't get Little Bob anywhere else.
That's true. Yeah. And is that also the reason? Why do you converse with your characters in English?
It's connected to get that. I mean, I'm not communicating to an Arabic intellectual audience in Beirut or in wherever. I'm talking to the north of England primarily. I'm thinking about my 3 or 4 mates up in Hull, where I'm from in the north of England, who wouldn't ever go, who don't know the difference between Damascus or Tel Aviv or wherever, you know, Iran, Iraq, they're all the same. And a lot of people feel like that. And I think you know, why should they necessarily know it more detailed than that? I think when they meet the characters, they connect with them. And again, when the news comes on after they've watched a documentary like the Liberace of Baghdad with Samir, or with Amer and Raghda and a Syrian love story, I think when they watch the news, which is bombarding them with all of the context and the heavy stuff again, they'll maybe connect in a way that they haven't. I don't think, however many times the news comes on every night, I've always been baffled by the fact that the newscasters believe that they're taking their audience to the different parts of the world. But having watched it from the part of the world that I'm from, I know that most people never leave their little towns where they live. Very few really travel internationally all over the place and understand the world and where this is and that is, the difference between Pakistan and India, or the difference between Iran and Iraq, you know, the difference between Israel and Palestine. Those little ins and outs, I think these are taken for granted by the news, that everybody's with all of that, and they're not. So I think it's very important for me to just connect with the people. My target audience is to really take people there to connect with people. From that contact, they can start to understand the context.
And you do that beautifully in the film Liberace of Baghdad with your main character, Samir Peter. He's a charming person with a really good sense of humor, and the bond that you'll have in the film is very strong and very interesting. I just wanted to share a clip of that because people wouldn't have seen it.
What's going on? Why all the shooting?
It's a war.
Are you okay driving?
Yes, I will drive.
Wow. Where are they shooting them from?
Behind these buildings.
Why?
We're happy because Iraq, they won the football game with Saudi Arabia.
Well, why they got so many guns? Well, where's all the...
Everybody is armed here.
They shouldn't be allowed to shoot bullets after a football.
Who will allow them? Who will prevent them?
They shouldn't...
Who? There is no government.
I'd come to Baghdad 9 months after the fall of Saddam and was staying in a heavily fortified hotel compound, home to foreign journalists, security companies, and contractors responsible for the rebuilding of Iraq. I wanted to make a film about what liberation meant for ordinary Iraqis, but I got led astray when I met Samir Peter.
Because of you, my romance had been stalled. I live for your love.
Samir described himself as the Liberace of Baghdad. In his heyday, he earned $10,000 a month as Iraq's most famous concert pianist. Today, he plays for a few dollars a night and lives in a basement room in the hotel.
Because of you, there is a song in my heart. Your face is so sad.
In the days of Saddam, Samir was often questioned by the secret police for his taste in Western music and his appetite for Western women.
So bright. Won't you spend the night with me tonight? Because of you. Huh! There's a song in my heart. I'm joking here. There was a woman today in the restaurant. I was playing with all my passion to her. So when she left, she stayed like this to me. She was so beautiful. She's living in this building.
Journalist?
Yes.
How old?
She's about 40. Beautiful. I would like to be famous. That is I don't like to collect fortune.
But you were famous, weren't you? You were famous here.
Yes.
And now, it's only now that I found you living in this room.
I want to change. I want to change everything in my life. I got fed up. The same routine every day. I'm going to school, teaching people. I want something new in my life. Always I'm looking for something new. That is my story with women also.
Samir has always dreamed of living in America and is waiting for a visa to come through so he can join his ex-wife and 2 of his children who now live there.
Then I go to sleep because I don't know whether in the morning I will be a date here because I am very close to the street. My room, you can see the street directly through the window.
You can't anymore.
No. Come, you can look from this hall, small home, yeah, from this hall. So this wall maybe will protect me a little bit.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Can you talk a little bit about Samir Peter and, you know, it's a beautiful film, this one, and really tugs at your heartstrings. So I was just wondering if you can, actually before we go into that, I'll just take some questions because there are some questions about this film. So Suchint Majumdar asks, you know, he says that this film has several dimensions: political, community, human. And it is fascinating that when you make a film, you don't really know what the outcome is going to be. So what went through your mind when you were caught in the crossfire and when there was so much uncertainty?
Which film? The Syria or?
Yeah, the Syria. They've all watched the Syrian film, so.
What went through my mind when?
You know, when you were caught in the crossfire, whether it was personal or whether, you know, whether on the street or when you were vulnerable.
Well, I mean, there's so many different aspects to it. I got caught. I was a week in a prison where they were torturing and probably killing the prisoners, and that was very horrific. To have been in the country and seen, as I said earlier, the facade, but then eventually to get through all of those layers and see the absolute truth of it, which is this raw, horrific, you know, brutality in the prisons, and also in a funny kind of way, it was fully understanding Amer and Raghda. In attempt in making a documentary, you try to understand your characters completely, and that's part of your journey, I guess, as a documentary filmmaker. And it was quite weird in a way that wow, you know, and to see those, in a way, I came out of the prison having more admiration in a way for Amer and Raghda because of the fact that they stood up to that level of horrific kind of torture. And then I suppose the personal thing for me was the more difficult thing. I thought I was I always think that the film should have a kind of positive impact. And at so many different times it had a negative impact, and that my arrest had caused them so much problems. And that was a question that always came up on the tour of the Q&As. Do you blame Sean for being arrested for screwing your life up? And their answer was always no, because we took a conscious decision to be in this film for political reasons, to tell the world about the brutality of Assad and Syria. And in another way, that it was a happier ending, because Yarmouk, where they lived, was completely flattened by the Assad forces. So little Bob and the whole family could have well been dead now, had I not been arrested and had they not been able to move. Now, and one of the things that Amer said was he always dreamed that the kids could live a normal life, and he would look at me and say, like your life, not like my life, like your life. I don't want this life, I want your life. And I think he felt like a life in the West would give them that.
Stability.
Now his problem is that little Bob's not speaking Arabic, and he's lost his Palestinian consciousness. And I think partly the kids are like, well, fuck the Arab world, let's get on with life here now. You know? Whereas he's still kind of passionately saying, no, 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 we have to still believe passionately in our roots.
Yeah.
So there's loads of different levels and different emotions, and it still continues, you know, with them. I'm still very much in touch. Little Kakao went for an interview in Paris.
So how do you? Sorry.
Yeah, to be a model.
Oh, okay.
Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, so I was just wondering, you've filmed for 4 years, 5 years, and you have a lot of rushes. How do you kind of structure your film? Do you just follow the arc of the, you know, the progression? And also, what is the role? I saw in the credits, there's a story editor. So what is the role of the story editor?
I think that was a division of 2 editors at the time that we had. It was a very complicated edit because it happened over such a long period that one of the editors decided to take the role of story editor, who was the editor I normally work with, Johnny Burke, because I suppose he was stepping out of it. Max Scholes had been the one that had taken the film from the beginning and sourced the material and really found the nuggets of it. But there was such a long, elongated process of the edit that I was working with 2 editors eventually on it, and I think they decided to split that credit that way. But it was a nightmare really to work out how to structure it, and I think it's a bit like the stuff I'm doing now with my parents. If there's so much material, you get lost in the moment when you're filming, and you film, and then you take time to look back and reflect on what's happened, and you eventually start concentrating on certain bits of the material and cutting them down and cutting them down and cutting them down, and then putting them together, and then and there's a kind of arc that you can still see, because you know the end. And I also think you can't really edit on the journey, so you can't really start helping yourself by saying, whilst you're shooting, I'll start cutting, because I think it's very difficult to start cutting until you know the end, an end point. So I just think it's a process that you have to go through, which is just a very long process where you almost boil down all of the material, and it suddenly starts kind of congealing and telling you a sort of shape, really. But it was a longer film, I remember, at certain points, and we ended up taking a good 20 minutes out, which I think helped.
Okay.
There's a big trend for long documentaries, I think, now, for 100 minutes or 120-minute documentaries, and I'm not a fan. I like, I think, 75 minutes and finish.
Yeah. So Sushma asks if, you know, at what point in the filmmaking did you realize that you have a story in front of you?
It's quite funny because I remember meeting with the editor Matt Scholes and saying, I don't have a film, because I'd been banging my head against the walls of the BBC and places for so long. And everybody was saying no, and I'd given up. And he was the one that said, just give me the hard drive, give me the material. And he disappeared for about 4 months. And he came back, and he was the one that got me enthusiastic again about it. So it's scary to think, really, how easily projects can disappear. I almost let this film disappear, to be honest. If it wasn't really for him, I think I might have, because it's a very alienating process when you're not supported by anybody, and you're literally on your own. But you get used to it.
Yeah. So basically, she also wanted to know when did you realize that you have a love story in front of you? But yeah. Also, some of Unikrishnan was saying, if, you know, how did they respond to the film? Raghda and Amer.
Yeah, they couldn't see it very clearly. unfortunately, by the time the film was finished, edited and completed, they were separated. So the love story was complete. And I remember one of the biggest screenings and the first early screenings together was in Amsterdam in Chisinsky number 1 or whatever it's called, the big 1,000-seat cinema. And we had them both invited, and me in the middle. So after the Q&A, there was like one either side. It was a very interesting. It was an interesting time. I remember them saying there that they'd watched the film and remembered so many more important things. So they were disappointed by the film.
Oh, really?
Because they remembered this event, and why didn't you include this event, and why didn't you include this event, and what about this, and what about that? Then they saw the film for the first time with an audience, and then they understood the film because they saw it through the eyes of the audience and realized the impact it had because of its way. So the film isn't necessarily a collection of your fondest memories of the journey. It has it's completely a different thing. And I think that's what they started to see when they watched the film through through the eyes of a foreign audience.
Yeah. And sorry. So Christina wanted to know, how is the family doing today?
Good. I mean, Raghda has moved back to the south of France. She was on the border with Syria for some time, but she started to have some risks, some death threats. So she had to move back to France. And now Bob is living with Raghda. Kaka has moved to Paris, had an interview for the modeling job. Amer is making sculptures in his little farmhouse somewhere. And the other boys are all working. So everything seems good, apart from Syria.
Yeah. And, so besides these films that you've made in conflict zones, like Baghdad, Yemen, Syria, you've made a film in Japan, and then you've made these films in Hull, which is the place where you come from. The one in your recent film, Northern Soul, you have located it in Hull. It's a beautiful film, again, very tenderly told. And the story kind of parallels your journey. And I mean, at least when you were a young person, where you dropped out of school. So I just wanted to know what made you make the shift, and how was it to be so close to a place that's so close to you, to be in a place that's so close to you, and kind of film characters, including your folks, who are part of the film.
I was invited back to be the director for the opening of the ceremony because the city was given the thing of City of Culture, the UK City of Culture. So I had a reason to go home. And it was an exciting year because suddenly the spotlight of all culture and arts was on my city for that year. So it was an exciting time to be there. It wasn't an ordinary time. And, as I said, whenever I've traveled around the world, I've always kind of had Hull in my heart, but I've never really been back to spend that much of an intense time. It was an interesting time to explore, I suppose, in the back of my mind, when I was filming Steve. I was thinking of my journey out of the factory, the journey and him stuck in the factory in a way. So in a way, it was a very reflective time for me. And it was a very positive outcome for me as well, that actually through the film, Steve found the strength to eventually walk from the factory. And he's now working positively in the community, helping kids with hip hop. And he's following, his enablement is following his dream and opening the corridors of hope for other kids to find their dream.
So do you think it's related to age, that as you, as a filmmaker, grows older, you look for things closer to home, you look for, answers. Do you think that could be one of the, you try to make sense of your world, your history, your place?
Spiritually speaking, that would be a great answer to say yes to, but the honest answer is I'm just chasing the money.
It's so disappointing, Sean.
I'm so sorry to disappoint you. Somebody said to me, are you really excited to be going back home to make this film in Hull? And I said to them, honestly speaking, I want to just go to Yemen. I've got no interest in going near Hull.
Really? Okay.
Yes. But, you make the most of an opportunity. And it was an opportunity to curate the opening show. And and I think what I learned by doing it is that you have to, you can find stories, and they're the most difficult stories to find in places where you're the most familiar. Very difficult. It's much more exciting and adventurous to go to foreign lands to find stories.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's a good task for film students to be sent off for one of their projects to somehow go back to what is familiar and try and find the fascination in the familiar.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, I don't know. At the moment, there's a lot more work in the north of England rather than in the foreign lands. So I think I'll be doing that spiritual thing of exploring myself in my city whilst the money's there.
Okay. So I'd really like to show that clip, where you're making another film, a new film with your mother. And it's very interesting because that's where I felt that you're having a conversation with yourself, where your son comes in.
I'd always wanted to make a film about the North, about home, about Hull, but through these magical moments, captured with my mum.
You're wearing my clothes as well?
What's just yours I'm doing, Sean?
How come?
Well, I just saw them there. I thought, well, they just need a quick iron. And I don't fuss. I just do them quickly.
Did you do the white shirt as well?
Anything else?
Police were called to investigate, and it doesn't accept that security measures were inadequate, pointing out that reports into the crime.
The daily bickerings, the daily shopping, the working class life I knew in Hull hadn't really changed.
So you both well then?
Yes.
I do. The Brexit bill, our Brexit liabilities, all sorts of figures that apparently Britain will have to pay when it comes to...
Britain was on the cusp of change, but being back at home had other challenges for me.
Figures we've heard have ranged everywhere from about 20 billion to 100 billion pounds.
Do you feel happy with your business? I just don't like looking at it. Just detest them. I don't know. I don't think they're... It's just too much.
Look.
Yeah, that I'm the baskets with. Oh, great. Does it hurt?
Yeah.
Good. Put your sleeve. Bend your elbow.
Pull the sleeves out first, Mum.
Just one. Get one off.
Not pull my head off.
There you are.
They're not far. So he's not been well, Dad?
Well, it's still the same. I mean, he has good days and bad days. Just it's
Chest pains are not good, though, are they?
Well, the thing is, he's got to live with it. He knows that.
Can't do anything about it anymore?
You can't do anything about it.
No more medicine?
No. Bam.
Whoa, no.
It's all right.
What are you doing?
I was getting my water.
Come here. God. How did you do that?
Just tripped over the step. I'm all right, Sean. I'm not,
You burned your knees, anything?
believe me. I can say more than that.
My dad was one of the dying heroes who fought in the war and remembered Hull's heyday as a booming fishing city.
Trawlers used to refit there.
That's what I was saying today.
There used to be a trawler stood there. And its final, Jack Davis worked on when they were doing the final before they went to sea.
But by the time I left school in the 1980s, the industry was gone and my generation was faced with a decade of unemployment. The grand, proud city that my dad had once belonged to had disappeared. I'd grown up the only boy in a Catholic family with 6 sisters, so I was a failure at school.
Every time I went to a teacher to ask about you, they all greeted me with a smile. Oh, John. You had no good reports ever. Just always that you were playing.
I just got this thing from the university. I've considerable pleasure in informing you that Hull University wishes to confer upon you a degree of doctorate.
Really?
Real? Is it real?
Is it real? Sean has been awarded an honour degree.
Doctorate?
Doctorate at the Hull University.
Sandhya, I wanted to know, what point do you realize that you're done with the filming and, that this is the end? And I want to tie it with the film you did in Yemen, The Reluctant Revolutionary, because now, you're trying to pitch for a film 10 years later with Kais, who's a fabulous character, who was such a reluctant who was so reluctant to get into the revolution. So, how do you decide that you want to make another film? How do you decide when this film is over? These are tough calls to make, right?
When to decide to give up making.
Yeah.
When to decide to give up trying to make the film is the truth with that one. I mean, Case has been telling me recently, no one is interested, forget it, Sean, because we've been trying for 4 or 5 years to get the funding for Yemen, for the follow-up. I think when the cholera thing happened, when the Saudis started bombing, and no one's really giving much attention to Yemen, and Case is such a great English-speaking character who has 1 foot in his world and 1 foot in our world, is such a great mediator. I think it would help understand, but from what I can gather, no one in broadcasting agrees with me. So I don't know. And if it wasn't so expensive, I would go. But the problem is, it's very expensive. Once you're there, you have to pay the bribes because the place is run by Houthis and minders and staying in official hotels. So it's not as if it's a project that can be done on the cheap. Otherwise, I would have just done it. I would have just done it, which is, to be honest, how I've done the other films. Because if you wait to be commissioned, it's waiting for Godot. It's waiting for clowns that don't know that they're all commissioning editors are essentially backing horses in a bookies. They just go for whatever, but they don't really creatively know what they're doing. They're just gambling, and usually on a big salary, whether to keep it or not. So you can't really wait for them. You have to get on with your film and make the film, which is what I've done with the Japan one. I've already financed a few shooting trips myself, And as a result of actually doing that, I've managed to get NHK to co-fund it. And unfortunately, the BBC, I don't know what's happening with them at the moment. So that's the difficulty. But I don't know what the answer is really. You know, you've got massively big names in documentary filmmaking like Kim Longinotto, who is currently self-financing her own film. She's bought her own camera, and for the first time she's making the film because she hasn't got any funding. So there's a real crisis at the moment. And I don't know what the answer is, because Netflix is the place where a lot of films are commissioned. But if you look at Netflix, they have a house style. I don't really do studio-based interviews or talking heads in that traditional way that they do. So my form of storytelling isn't really visible in Netflix or Amazon or the new outlets. And it should only be, it's usually been supported by the BBC because part of its remit is to tell these kind of stories. Part of the BBC's remit isn't commercially driven. It has a responsibility to tell stories in various ways, but it's all quite scary times, really. It almost feels. You know, and I don't know. I mean, I've worked at Dock Edge in India and at Dhaka Dock Labs, so I know that I'm talking from a point of privilege because people make films for nothing in all sorts of parts of the world. So it's I'm only talking about here that we had a tradition of being funded to make films. But I think once it's gone, I don't know what happens.
And it's going to get worse now with the pandemic, and
I think there's loads of things happening, but I don't know if it's what I find what I do. So I think there's lots of things being commissioned. There's lots of things happening. I just don't think it's particularly the kind of films I make, really. I think that's more about that Tiger King sort of stuff, and the Netflix stuff that rates and that's big global stories. I think I don't know, but I don't think that should deter. As I say, when we do the workshops with Doc Lab and places, I think that that pitch, the international pitch that Sheffield Doc Fest do. There was a couple of films I think from Dock Edge that were pitched as a result of pitches over there that have come over here. So they eventually do happen and surface. And I don't think, I'm not a big believer in despondency. I think we as filmmakers are the people that need to drive, be in the driving seat, regardless of the commissioning. We have to keep making the films, regardless of that.
Yeah, but it does get tough after a point, you know.
Well, you've got to live, haven't you?
Yeah. So I was wondering how you got into this form of, filming, doing the filming yourself, kind of, doing the narration and things like that. At what point in your career did you think this was?
Quite early on, really, because I'd gone through a film school. Actually, that one that you see in the end of the teaser with Harry, my son, he ended up applying to the same film school that I started at. But it's quite a television-based film school, Bournemouth, and they were forcing everybody to work in a big standard crew, and I found that a barrier to intimacy. And that was just at the advent of the small handheld camera, and that's when I harnessed my first film was in a factory where I was working, and I couldn't get access to the story. So I just took the camera with me whilst I was on the job and made the film as one of the workers. And that taught me that actually I was making the film from within, looking out. And most of the times when we make films, we're with the big crew looking from the out, looking in. And that's what that little camera enabled. It enabled me to jump on a plane and be in Damascus as a tourist. In the thing, looking out, be in Yemen as a tourist, looking in, looking out. and not coming in for with the big, and it also enabled me to be free, to be free to travel, and then it enables you to be flexible with the budget. And when you don't have a budget, it enables you to make the film and not worry about having to pay a cameraman because you're doing it yourself, you know. So it was all about flexibility and freedom. And then I think much more intimately, some of the stuff I filmed with my parents is very, very intimate because you're completely, the camera's almost, very much invisible.
Yeah, I'd like to show the clip, the danger tours in Yemen, because that kind of, you know, using other ways now you're trying to raise funds for the film, and it's very interesting since you can't go there and actually begin filming what you've done with that.
So that's made almost virtually by directing.
Yeah, I like that. So it's very nice. So can we play that, Raghu?
The last time I was in Yemen, it was the height of the revolution. The country was euphoric with hope. I'd made a film with Case, a tour guide. 10 years on, Case started sending me videos of his daily life.
I can't open the curtains because right in front of my house there are 2 people from the army. So if they just see that I'm opening the curtains and filming, I will be in big trouble. Shit. That's another head. That's another head.
Case is living under daily missile attacks from Saudi Arabia. It's too dangerous for the kids to go to school. They're living with no electricity, running water or gas.
I've been since 7 a.m. in the morning, waiting to fill the LPG for the kitchen. Has been 5 hours already. This is how life is in Sana'a.
Back home with his wife, the storm is coming.
Talking to the camera, she understands that I'm sending videos to Sean. Wait, we'll hear the storm very soon.
Like every Yemeni, Case struggles to provide for his family. He's only had a few weeks' work in the last 4 years. The irony is, the only interest the outside world takes in Yemen is extreme tourism, providing Case with dangerous work in Al-Qaeda-run territory. The American tourists dress up as terrorists to send selfies home.
What a guest. ISIS would love to get someone like that.
8 years on, the revolution that started as hope for freedom is now a proxy war.
Yemen has been a graveyard for any colony. British, Turkish, Portuguese. It's always a graveyard. It's a strong airstrike. It's going to hit. Do you hear it?
Case starts an emergency food service to help families in his community.
As you see, it's a small truck. We are going to Yazoo village. It's about 55 kilometers from Sana'a. And we are delivering blankets and food. The food will not be enough, but it's better than nothing, of course. It's a good start.
Case is getting me a visa. I want to follow him in his new work, helping families that face famine with his food parcel service.
Sean is photographing. I'm filming you.
Yeah.
Video?
Yep.
You're doing good?
Yep. That's the first shot for the day. An abandoned toilet in the desert.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Okay? Okay, let's go.
That's lovely. So how, what is it that attracts you to conflict zones? Why do you make so many films there?
I'm not really chasing another conflict zone. I'm sort of reconnecting with a couple of friends, I suppose, that I made from the past with Case, and it just so happens that there's I suppose the frustration of what the news is covering on Yemen, and also coupled with the personal messages I get from him. I get messages about what's really happening, and then I watch the news and I think, fuck, that's not happening on the news. And then I think, well, maybe I should tell his story about what's really happening, you know, a continuation somehow. But as I say, it's been such a struggle. But you know, that material was edited from the material he films, and then our trip. I met him a couple of times in Oman, neighboring Yemen.
Okay.
Where he's gone looking for work or he's gone looking for a visa, and I've gone to meet him and we film a little bit, and then I tried to sort of, it's such a difficult one, really.
It is. So do you guide him in the and ask him to take certain shots?
It's very frustrating because I want him to film more with his wife, and he's so scared of her that he doesn't. And I, you know, and then I get very frustrated, but then I remember, well, he's not a director, he's the subject.
And also he doesn't want to show his wife on screen, right?
She can't be filmed, but if just her voice even. I said, okay, I've given up wanting to film, even the black abaya thing. No, nothing. So it's become a little bit, and then his daughters are lovely as well. So I think there's so many possibilities, but now his wife is saying that it's haram for the daughters to film anything. I mean, so there's just that careful balance of respecting the local tradition and me forcing him to break it in order to get a commission.
Yes.
Because, you know, what's really interesting is that the wife is very traditional, wants to be fully covered, and Case doesn't give a shit. So Case is with his daughter when they're drinking Coca-Cola, and she's fully open. Don't let the wife see. God, never let the wife see that she's open. But when they're with the wife, she's kind of closed again, you know. So he's a very open-minded. He's the opposite to the kind of stereotype you imagine of the Arabic man, and that's also why he's really interesting, I think. And he can kind of spell out in very simple language all of the fucked up contradictions of the world right now. Funding Saudi Arabia when they're dropping the bombs on Yemen, and we're not, you know, the complicity is just outrageous. It's incredible. Meanwhile, you know, I found half of the money for the Japanese film, and that's because the commissioning editor in Japan is a very staunch supporter of Naoki and Naoki's voice, and I think I suppose that's what what you do as a filmmaker is you look for allies in commissioning editors. I had a strong ally in Nick Fraser at Storyville for a number of years, so he was very supportive of me to the point of never knowing, to be honest, where I was in the world with a commission. The Yemen film he commissioned, but he thought he was getting a film from Syria. And it was only when he came to the cutting room that I told him, actually, it's not Syria. And he said, where is it? And I said, Yemen. But had I told him before, he'd have had, no, I don't want a boring film from Yemen.
Yeah.
And now he's very happy that he's got an exciting film from him. I think all of that's interesting, how you play the commissioning process, and it's again, I suppose it's different in London to how it is in India, but I think that there's a very tactical way in which you have to approach commissioning. You have to be as inventive as you do in getting access to countries where you can't get in, and I think filmmaking is all about opening the closed doors. All the doors are closed in front of you. And it's a question of opening all of those doors. And that's with the character, it's with the story, it's with the country, it's with the commission.
Okay, there's an interesting question from Sushma. How do you negotiate the old documentary making adage about an outsider, and more specifically about, you know, a white person making films in the poor world, in quotes?
Yeah, it's not cool now, is it? In the new world order, I'm not allowed to go anywhere other than Hull. The problem with that is that I've not lived in Hull for 20 years.
And probably not as interesting as these other places.
No, I think that if you make an honest film with the people that you make the film with, I don't buy into all of this white male thing. I agree with it because there's too many white males making films in a disconnected way around the world. And yes, the indigenous people should be making those films. But I also think that, I think if you make I tend to make friends when I make a film. So I think it's insane to say you can't travel around the world anymore and make friends and make films because you're a white man. I mean, God, that's almost as bad as Brexit. That we can never leave this godforsaken island ever again.
Yeah, I suppose it's the gaze, as always, and that's important.
I like to try to leave a legacy and try to work with people that are on the ground and incorporate as many local people in the process as possible. But I you know, Palestine, I want to go back there and make another film. So I sort of sympathize and understand it, our colonial past. I haven't made a film in India yet either.
Yeah, that would be interesting, but maybe you can leave it to us to make our films.
Right.
But that was great, Sean. Thank you so much. I hope we get to see screen more of your films. You know, definitely some of the films I'd like to screen at a later stage. Northern Soul for sure. It's beautiful. And thank you so much. It was delightful.